Today we are doing one thinker who has influenced the world a lot and a lot. That man is John Locke, who influenced English Revolution, American Revolution and French Revolution, and in fact the way we think about political process itself. John Locke made certain changes to the theory proposed by Hobbes, and those changes in a way created what we call liberal democracies. Let us see the changes he created. Hobbes took the assumption that man is essentially power hungry and negative. But Locke took it, Locke was not intimidated by Hobbes' assumption. Locke took the idea that man is not so negative, but at the same time not so positive as he doesn't need any center. So, to Hobbes, if it is essentially negative, and so all control to center. This is Hobbes' position. But Locke said, not so negative, but requires center. So, both of them are making certain assumptions under what they call state of nature. Hobbes' state of nature is every man against every man, whereas to Locke, state of nature is not so negative and not so positive. So he requires center. Locke asks a question which is missed by Hobbes, that if all the people are transferring their power to the center, like in Hobbes' scheme, where the center is monarch, what prevents the monarch from abusing his power? After all, man is power hungry and the monarch is a man. So, Locke proposes, unlike Hobbes, that total power should not be surrendered to the center. So Locke makes two modifications. One, don't surrender everything to the center. That is the first one. Individual has certain rights and that should never be surrendered. It is these that became later fundamental rights. Right to life. Right to religion. So these rights are not surrendered to the center, to the government, to the state. So, center, unlike in Hobbes' case, will have only control in certain spheres over individual. So center will not have absolute control. That is the concept of fundamental rights. These are the rights that the state cannot take from the individual. So that is it. And second it says that whatever is transferred to the center can never be permanent. It should be periodically assessed. It means the people are not transferring power to a monarch. They should transfer to a power which requires to be periodically assessed. It means elected government. And even this elected government doesn't have all the powers. For example, there is legislature. Legislature periodically assesses. See, periodic assessment has two dimensions. Number one, legislature may remove the government, which later became parliamentary democracy. Or people themselves may remove directly, without reference to the legislature. That became presidential government. But what Locke is saying that the center's power are periodically assessed. And there is a legislature making laws. That is to say, center doesn't have control over fundamental rights, not doesn't have control over legislature making laws completely, and whether it should stay in power or not is subjected for periodic assessment through elections. Through elections. So elections, legislature, legislative control over the center, or you call them executive, limit the power of executive. And of course, center can't take what are regarded as certain important rights of individuals. These are the ideas that were quite familiar. What we are learning now is that these are the things that Locke proposed first. We are so familiar with legislature, legislative control over executive, elections, fundamental rights. But all of them were proposed by Locke before English Revolution. He influenced English Revolution and later American and French revolutions. That is how he contributed to the idea of separation of powers of legislature, executive and judiciary. So surely that is the foundation of modern democracy. So that is one very important contribution. Second thing about John Locke is when he listed the rights which the states cannot take, one of the rights he listed was right to property. One of the rights listed was right to property. Right to property was basic because he thought right to property is coming from right to life. Right to life meant right to one's own labor and its product, which is nothing but right to property. This to him is an important right. And how did he explain? Right to property is owning up some of the common property. And he said, if something is common and if man adds labor to it, then he can claim. Something is common, man adding his labor to it, and then he can claim. But can he add labor to anything and can claim anything as his own? Can he add some labor to ocean and say the ocean is his? It is not so. He put two important conditions before somebody saying that it is his property. He said, one can own you can add labor to something common and own it. Say it is yours. When there is enough and good left in common for others. It means your acquisition of property shouldn't be affecting others. They have the right to own property. So it means right to property should satisfy certain conditions. Just like your right to liberty shouldn't impinge on others' rights. But what this right says, implies is that Locke is saying that it is your right, and Locke is not putting any limits on how much property one can acquire. Nor is he saying how much labor you should add before you say you are the owner of it. The only condition is that others also have enough to own. But others may own, may not own. Only you may own. And it may lead to income inequalities. Locke least bothered. There is no question of criticizing inequalities here. As long as you are not affecting others' right to acquire property, you can acquire as much as possible. So this is something fundamental to capitalism. And in Locke's scheme, you can see capitalism and democracy linked. Extension of right to life, right to property. And the state shouldn't be taking these rights, is what capitalism is. Right to acquire property. So, both democracy and capitalism, which turned out to be innovative and radical ideologies by the end of the 20th century, were theoretically justified and partly conceived by John Locke. And when others worked out alternatives to democracy, then they worked out a system where there is no separation of powers, and it led to authoritarian regimes. And when people rejected right to property and worked out systems with the focus on reduction of inequalities, like the former USSR, in the end failed. So Locke's ideas turned out to be extremely insightful and productive, and turned out to be far superior compared to the alternative ideas or alternative systems. So that's how he is one of the greatest thinkers.